Hi guys, welcome to ProtoPilot. My name's Darren, and in this pie slice, we're going to take a look at the two different kinds of variables that we've got inside of ProtoPie. So these are the two options where you can choose a variable to be in this scene, or you can choose a variable to be available for all scenes. So which one should you choose? Under what situations should you choose them? Those are the sorts of things we're going to be taking a look at next. Okay, so we create variables down in the variables panel, which is just sitting down here in the bottom left corner. So I'm going to add a variable. So I'm going to hit the plus button. And we've got two options. We can add a variable for all scenes, or we can add a variable for this scene. Now, these two names are a bit of a mouthful. So I like to refer to these as global variables and local variables. Okay. So a global variable will be accessible across all of the scenes in your prototype. But we're going to look at both of these. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a local variable, so a for this scene variable. And I'm going to call it my local variable. Okay, and I'm going to make it a text variable. Cool. Okay, so I'm going to create another variable as well. I'm going to create a global variable, so a for all scenes variable. And I'm going to call this one my global variable. There you go. And I'm also going to make this a text variable. Cool, so we've got our two variables in place. I've got two scenes in this pie file. So I'm just going to go over to scene 2, and you'll see that my global variable is sitting in here, but my local variable is not. And so this just kind of makes you see that the global variables are accessible across all scenes. So every time you create a global variable, it's going to be in the variables panel on every single scene that you create. But when you create a local variable, it's only going to be, if we go back to scene 1, it's only going to be on the scene where you create it. Okay. Of course, this means that you can create local variables with the same names if you really wanted to, and they're not going to clash. But you can only have a single variable, a single global variable with a single name across your whole pie file. Okay. Okay. So we're gonna test out the local variable. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over to my triggers panel. And I'm going to add a detect trigger. Okay, and I'm going to select this input field that I've got here in the scene. So that's just called input. And I'm going to select the input's text property. Just going to scroll down and find the text property here. And to this trigger, I'm going to add an assign response. And assign is used to assign values to variables. So I'm going to select my local variable here from the drop down. And inside this formula, I'm going to create a little formula. And I'm going to target the input field here. So I'm going to hit the FX button and the plus button. And I'm going to find my input. And I'm going to select it. I'm going to type a dot so that we can access the input's properties, and I'm going to find the text property here. Okay, so input.text completes my formula, and I'm just going to click OK here. Cool. So I'm going to add another trigger. I'm going to add a tap trigger this time. And I'm going to choose this center label button as my target. Okay. And to this tap trigger, I'm going to add a text response. And I'm going to select my text object. So that's this one here. And I'm going to change my content to formula because I want to write a little formula in here. And in this formula, I'm just going to tap the FX button again, tap the plus button, and I'm going to choose the my local variable. And I'm going to click OK. Okay, so what's going to happen here is we're going to type something into the input field. And when we tap the send to label, it's going to print the response or the text that we've typed into this label underneath. So let's give that a go. So let's come over to preview here, type something, and then when we hit the button, we can see that it's printed into the label below. Okay, so that's effectively using a local variable to take the information from an input field and then using the button as the trigger, passing it into the text object. Okay, so let's switch over to global variables, and we're going to do a little example for that. So I've got another button here, so I'm just going to show that. I've got a button at the bottom of the screen here. Okay, so I'm going to select this button object, and I'm going to add another tap trigger. And I'm also going to add an assign response to this one. And this time I'm going to select my global variable. And I'm going to come into my formula field, and I'm going to do the same thing. I want to grab the input.text value. So I'm just going to write that inside of my formula here. And this time I'm going to add a jump response because I want to jump to scene 2. So let's just choose that there. Okay. So that's all I need to do here. I'm going to go over to scene 2. And I've got a label here, and I want to basically put that same value but in this label on this second scene. So to trigger that, I'm going to add a start trigger. And start triggers just automatically trigger when the scene loads. And to this start trigger, I'm going to add a text response. And I'm going to choose my text object that I've got here. And then I'm going to go into my content, change it to formula. And again, I want to pick up this global variable here. So I'm just going to choose that inside of my formula. Click OK. And I'm going to go back to scene 1 so I can test this out. And this time, if I type something in here, and I'm going to have to just select here just to get rid of the keyboard. Bad design on my part there. And I'm going to hit this button here at the bottom of the scene. And you can see I've moved to scene 2, and my value in my global variable has been picked up. Okay, so these are the two use cases. So if you want to affect something within a scene, you want to be using local variables. But if you want to share some information across multiple scenes, that's when you need to use global variables. And it's important not to use global variables if you're only doing something within a scene. Because one of the things you can't do is you can't change a global variable into a local variable. You effectively have to recreate that variable, and then you're going to have to update all your variable references. So really need to think about what kind of variable you need up front. So if you're likely to be maybe creating a component out of something later on, then you definitely want to make sure you're using local variables. And in fact, that's a nice little segue into components and how variables work in components. So we're going to have a look at that next. Okay, so let's go back to scene 1. We're already on scene 1. There we go. If you're not on scene 1, make sure you're back at scene 1. And what we're going to do is we're going to select this form, all the objects that make up this form at the top of our screen. So I've got my 3 objects here, and I'm going to make them a component. So I'm just going to hit the component button. Right, so my objects are now a component. I'm just going to call this form. Okay, and I'm going to come over to my preview window, and I'm just going to test. I'm going to test this again. So I'm going to type something in, and I'm going to hit the send button, and you'll see it doesn't work. It's broken, and it's broken because my local variable is still sitting here in the scene. But if I go into my component, you'll see that it hasn't actually copied the variable into the component, it's left it behind. And we've got some nasty orange responses over here which aren't happy because they can't find their variable. It's effectively not here. Okay, but this is an easy fix. We can just step back into the scene and we're going to select this local variable and we're just going to copy it. You can also use Command C or Control C if you're on Windows. We're going to go back into our form component. And we don't even need to select anything. We can just do a Command V here, and it knows where the variable goes. We're just going to paste it into the variables panel there. And you can see as soon as we've pasted the variable into the panel, all that nasty orange has gone away. Our component is now happy. It can find the variable name. Okay, so if we step back out of the component, back to the scene, and we can go over and give this another test. And then we're going to press the button and you can see now that it's working again. Okay. So the kind of takeaway here is that if you're creating some UI and then you're deciding to create a component out of it, and you're using lots of variables, you'll need to manually copy those variables into your component currently. It's not going to take them with it when you create a component. Okay, cool. Okay, so there's one final thing I want to share with you about variables. So to look at this, we're going to go back into our form component. And what I want to do is, this is actually a component variable. So once you put a variable inside of a component, it's a component variable. It's not really a local variable anymore. I mean, effectively, they're kind of the same thing, but I like to think these as component variables. And I actually want to change the name of this variable. So I'm just going to take the word local out. I just want to call it my variable. So I'm just going to take that out, press return. And immediately you see that we've got our horrible orange back again, because we've changed the name of the variable over here in the variables panel. And unfortunately in ProtoPie, it doesn't automatically update variable names inside of formulas. Or variable names inside of responses, as you can see here. So I'm going to have to reselect my variable again. So I'm going to come into assign, and I'm going to have to rechoose it from the list here. And down here in this text response, I've got this formula, and I'm going to have to go into this. I'm going to have to delete that out, hit the plus button, and rechoose my variable as well. Okay, and now everything's back to normal and nice and happy. Okay, so that about wraps up my look at variables. Hope this has been of some use to you. Hopefully it's demystified variables a little bit, the different types of variables and how you should use them. If you like the video, give it a like, and as I always say, if you want to hear more from me, then please subscribe to the channel, and I'll hopefully see you next time.